Meeting number 43 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. I call the meeting to order. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Today, we are beginning our study on eliminating hate crimes and violence against women and marginalized groups. So for the witnesses, when you're ready to speak, you can click on your microphone icon to activate your mic, to address your comments through the chair. And if you want to change your interpretation, if you look at the bottom of your screen, you can choose English, French, or the floor. And when you're speaking, please speak slowly and clearly for our interpreters. And when you're not speaking, then your mic should be on mute. So I want to welcome all of our witnesses today. We have Amira El-Gawabi. I hope I didn't make a mess of that. She's a human rights advocate. And we also have from Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Canada, Sadia Mahdi, who is the regional vice president of the Organization of Peace Village, Asif Khan, who is the national director for public relations. We will have Safwan Chowdhury, who is the director of media relations there. And then from the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, we have Nuzat Jaffrey, who is the executive director. Each of our witnesses will have 5 minutes to make their remarks, followed by a round of questions. When you get to be close to the end of your time, you'll see the 30-second warning. That's just to gently tell you that you need to wrap it up. So we're going to begin with Amira for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Good morning, respected parliamentarians and staff. Thank you so much for inviting me to present today at the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Thank you, Madam Chair Gladue, for convening today's meeting. I am here in my personal capacity as a human rights advocate who wears many hijabs, as I like to say. I'm a founding board member of the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, an organization that monitors hate in Canada, as well as a board member with the Silk Road Institute, an organization that fosters cross-cultural and interfaith understanding. I'm also part of Canada's labor movement, specifically at the Canadian Labour Congress, where we actually released a groundbreaking report in 2019 titled Islamophobia at Work. And it's actually there that I will begin in terms of my remarks in discussing the way that Muslim women and girls are especially vulnerable to hate crimes by virtue of their status as Muslim women. It is a combination and interaction of gender, racialization, and religion that makes Muslim women vulnerable to bias-motivated violence and intimidation. Many Muslim women in Canada and around the world choose to wear head coverings like what I'm wearing today, my hijab, the niqab or burqa for various reasons. Over the years, we know that the hijab and niqab have been, and sadly continues to be at times, vigorously debated and reported by media in Canada and frequently politicized quite negatively. In fact, currently, Bill 21 in Quebec prevents women from wearing the hijab if they choose to work in various professions, including teaching, the law, and policing. And as noted in the CLC's report on Islamophobia, the interaction of gender, religion, race, and culture is especially acute for Muslim women who cover. Their visibility puts them at higher risk and makes them much more vulnerable to gender-based Islamophobia because they are immediately identified targets for perpetrators motivated by hate against Muslims and gender-based violence. Now, of course, we don't know the exact reason or evidence that was found by police in the most recent horrific attack in London against the Afzal family. But what we do know is that it was motivated by hate towards Muslims, and it is highly likely that it is due to their clothing, their religious clothing, that they were most tragically targeted, and our thoughts and hearts are with those families and those they've left behind, including little Fayaz. So a 2018 qualitative study by researcher Sidra Ahmed titled Invisible Violence Against Hypervisible Women, published by the University of Toronto, shows that very high rate of unreported gender-based violence against Muslim women in the GTA. That qualitative report documents the everyday Islamophobic experiences and impacts on Muslim women. The Muslim women in the study reported incidents of being spat at, yelled at, sworn at, and experienced physical as well as sexual assaults. Of the 40 Islamic incidents documented Islamophobic incidents documented in the study, only 3 incidents were reported to the police. At this point, I would actually share my own personal experiences with the committee, if I may. Several incidents throughout my lifetime as wearing the hijab in Canada have really brought home to me how fraught it could be sometimes to be wearing visible Muslim clothing. In my own neighborhood here in Ottawa, in Orleans, I too was, almost hit by a truck that deliberately was swerving very, very dangerously close towards me while the driver was yelling obscenities at me. I have repeatedly had people harass me and yell at me. And while I maintain that the vast majority of Canadians are loving people, really who promote dignity for all, it is unfortunately these currents of hatred that do run within our society that is, of course, the focus of today's speech to you, and I hope the focus of some of the remedies that you'll be looking at. And as Statistics Canada noted in its 2018 release on police-reported hate crimes, for all types of hate crimes, nearly a third of victims reported by police between 2010 and 2018 were female, so 32%. And violent incidents targeting the Muslim and Indigenous populations were more likely than other types of hate crimes to involve female victims. Of all victims of violent crimes targeting the Muslim population that were reported to police, 45% were women or girls, as was the case for 45% of victims of hate crimes against Indigenous populations. And of note, the relatively high proportion of female victims of hate crimes targeting Muslim and Indigenous populations could be related to specific factors, according to Stats Canada. That means that because the practice of wearing the head coverings makes religious identity more visible for Muslim women than for men. What we've also seen, unfortunately, is visibly Muslim politicians, athletes, and celebrities who have been targets of intense hate and vitriol, being threatened daily with violence, rape, or murder. Many of them are forced to leave their careers out of their safety. We have, sadly, many examples in the current parliament, as many may know, MP Ikra Khalid, who had received horrific threats when she had been tabling M103, as many of you are aware of. And we know that, MP Salma Zahid, who wears the headscarf, has also faced some harassment as well. And of course, I can't speak to what she has gone through, but I know that it is not easy to represent constituents while also wearing religious clothing. Hate crime statistics, though, are hugely unreported, especially in the Muslim community, as there is a lot of fear of being blamed and shamed. And of course, there is distrust of law enforcement or the feeling that there's unfair over surveillance and detention anyhow within our Muslim communities. In fact, according to Statistics Canada, 2/3 of hate crimes are unreported. Furthermore, we also realize that there are serious problems with prosecuting hate crimes, and this is according to the fact that police solved just 28% of hate crime incidents in 2017, as shown by Stats Canada analysis. By comparison, among all criminal code violations, excluding traffic violations, 40% were solved by police in that same year. So even when the hurdle of reporting to police is cleared by victims of hate crimes, the chances of success are 12% lower than with other types of offenses. Now, online hate is another area in which we know that there is spillover into real life, and online hate does disproportionately impact racialized people, including women and visibly Muslim women, where the agenda of online trolls and haters is to silence or harm women and to control who has a voice. This is an important point to note, especially for those who argue that limiting online content is a freedom of expression. There are limits to the free expression, including hate speech, especially when violence and hate is planned or incited. Many of committee members today may be surprised to learn that a report by the Institute for Strategic Dialogue in the UK identified more than 6,600 online pages, accounts, or groups in Canada that were spreading white supremacist or misogynistic views. On a per capita basis, Canada was shown to be one of the most active countries in the world when it comes to spreading toxic views. Now, with the work at the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, we have advanced recommendations to government on how best to address online hate, which does remain a very serious problem. We know, for instance, that deplatforming works.
I'm sorry.
Yes?
That's the end of your time.
Oh, that's my end of my time?
So,
okay.
Yeah, we'll get the rest of it on the questions when we
Sure.
go through that.
Thank you so much.
I think we have, thank you very much. I think we have Safwan here, so we'll suspend briefly and do a sound check with him, and then we'll go to the next organization. Stephanie. organization, which is Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Canada, and there are 3 of you. So I'm not sure which one will start, but maybe Ms. Mahdi will start with you. And
actually, if it's okay, I'll go first, and then
excellent.
We'll end with Sadia, if that's all right.
Very good. Please go ahead, Mr. Khan.
Okay. Well, hello and assalamu alaikum to my fellow Muslim friends here. My name's Asif Khan. I'm the National Public Relations Director of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat in Canada. We are a revitalist movement within Islam. We are also a persecuted community in many Muslim countries. I'd like to thank the panel for inviting me to speak today. However, I will be brief and I'll extend some of my time to Sadia. Hopefully that'll be okay. And my colleague Safwan will also be brief as well. I'm sure her, Sadia's perspective will be much more valuable to the panel than from us. Before I do pass it off to Safwan, I will like to say that Islam's core objectives are twofold. The first is that everyone should attain to have a relationship with God, and they should do so in their own way. The second objective is that everyone should serve humanity. That is, be kind to your neighbors, be kind to your countrymen, look after one another. Now, the government is not in a place to promote the first objective, but the government can promote humanity as being core to the fabric of being Canadian. Our community's motto is love for all and hatred for none. If each person took this to heart and strived to be of service to others, there could be no hate towards people of different religions, ethnicities, race, and especially gender. So I thank you for your time. Godspeed. Safwan?
Thank you, Asif, and most importantly, thank you for organizing this wonderful panel and giving us this opportunity. Just like Asif, I don't plan to take more than a few seconds, so I will be brief, and then Sadia will cover a majority of our point of views. The only thing that I wish to add here is that words matter, and leadership has never been more important. In the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Boris Johnson infamously described Muslim women in a burqa as letterboxes and bank robbers. The following week, there was an increased record of 375% in anti-Muslim incident. More than half of such incidents in the following 3 weeks were directed towards Muslim women, and 42% of street-based incidences directly referenced Prime Minister Johnson and the language that he used. Former President Nicolas Sarkozy.
L'ancien président français Nicolas Sarkozy avait dit que le problème de la façon dont les femmes musulmanes s'habillaient était que c'était un enjeu de liberté et de dignité des femmes. Je cite l'ancien président. Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente. Oui, Madame Sidou. Zaïd, pardon. Je crois...
Channel and hearing French.
Ah, okay. Yes,
Please
I don't hear that on the floor, but let's suspend and we'll come back to you in just a second.
So for the benefit of our member of parliament, I'll just repeat the last couple of sentences. But the point that I was making is that words matter, and right now leadership has never been more critical. When in the UK, we've had Prime Minister Boris Johnson's comments describing Muslim women's head covering and burqa as describing them as letterboxes and bank robbers, and a 375% increase in anti-Muslim hate in the following 2 weeks. 42% of them were street incidents directed towards women, being attributed to the perpetrators as referencing Prime Minister Johnson's words. Or I also referenced former President of France, Sarkozy, where Nicolas Sarkozy said, the problem of Muslim women's outfit is not a religious problem. It is an issue of freedom and dignity of women. We just find it really interesting that right now, in a time where every country, city, and state has decided to make the face mask compulsory in order to combat coronavirus, that this very statement of it is a matter of dignity of women is in direct conflict of that. So we look to our leaders and the choice of words. And We're obviously grateful for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who just as early as today issued an important statement about an incident that took place at the mosque in Edmonton. But we urge all of our leaders to be, to also question other world leaders and the statements that they're making. Thank you, and I yield to Sadia.
Very good. Ms. Mahdi.
Thank you, Safwan and Asif. And Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you all. I'm very thankful and honored to have this opportunity to speak to you today about my experience of living in Canada as a Muslim woman. Canada has always been a beacon of peace and respect in the world and celebrates multiculturalism as a strength. Today, this image is being attacked, and all Canadians must work hard to ensure that it is upheld. In 1985, when I moved to Canada, I was not truly aware of the significance of our move. As Ahmadi Muslims, my family fled the persecution in Pakistan. Many families also made this journey to Canada, which serves as a safe haven from religious persecution. I came with my father, Dasim Mehdi, who was sent here as an imam, a religious missionary who would serve the community for the next 25 years. Going to school was a very pleasant experience for me. Throughout my elementary and high school period, there were only a handful of Muslims in our school, and I have very fond memories of my school days. My childhood in Maple, Ontario was very pleasant, and I never experienced any Islamophobic or racist remarks, even though we were definitely a visible minority. So now I'm surprised and saddened that the atmosphere is changing from the wonderful experiences of my childhood to the current atmosphere where hate-motivated attacks are on the rise. Hate crimes have exponentially increased and Muslims are targets. Decades later, my own daughters have been called terrorists and other racial slurs at school. The recent tragedy that occurred in London, Ontario, has shook the Canadian Muslim family to our core. The horrifying fact that this innocent family was murdered while taking an evening walk, just because they were Muslims, was a sickening wake-up call to all of us that much work is needed to be done to educate our fellow Canadians, to remind them of their true values, and to remove myths and misconceptions that lead to the hatred of Muslims. Recently, we have seen it become more common for people to proudly share racist and hateful opinions online, in social media, and in person. Many Muslim women have reported being bullied and attacked for the way they dress because our hijab does make us a visible minority. Our scripture tells us to wear the hijab as a symbol of our modesty. It is actually meant to show that we are different, that our faith is an important facet of our identity. Bill 21 of Quebec is a painful example of how dangerous it is for people in power to be misinformed. Banning people from wearing their religious clothing or symbols is not a reflection of a secular state, rather of an oppressive one. Freedom of religion and expression are guaranteed to us by the Charter, and by passing this law, Quebec has unfortunately promoted the ideology that if someone dresses different, they are different. These misconceptions should be addressed, not validated by making such discriminatory laws. I am a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, and our community has been working hard for many years to promote our motto, love for all, hatred for none, and work for and with Canadian society for the betterment of all. We hold regular events to promote peace, celebrate diversity, have blood drives, donation campaigns, food drives, all in an effort to work cohesively with the greater community and to highlight that it is our faith that makes us better Canadian citizens, rather than the perception that it would hinder us. Although a lot of work is being done by many communities and politicians across Canada, like the introduction of Motion 103 by MP Ikra Khalid, condemning Islamophobia, there is still a long road ahead. Moreover, acts that are driven by hate due to race, religion, or ethnicity should be punished to the full extent of the law. The fact that the London, Ontario attacker has been charged with terrorism is a step in the right direction in order to deter others from carrying out such horrific acts. Canada has become the epitome of what tolerance and justice looks like and shines as an example for the rest of the world. In order for this reputation to be upheld, education is the most important step that we as a nation can take. Learning about Islamic values is the first step towards respect and friendship among Canadians. Thank you.
Very good. And now we will go to our final witness here, Ms. Jaffrey, for 5 minutes. Did we lose Ms. Jaffrey?
Hello, can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, so now we can hear you. You can begin. You have 5 minutes.
I am so sorry. Well, first of all, thank you so very much for inviting the Canadian Council of Muslim Women this morning, Madam Chair, and parliamentarians, Madam Clerk, and staff. My name is Nushat Jaffrey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, or CCMW. I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Haudenosaunee peoples. It is also the land of the Petun and Huron-Wendat peoples, and recognized officially as the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as they were here at the point of contact. This land is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. CCMW is an organization dedicated to the equality, equity, and empowerment of Canadian Muslim women and girls, founded in Winnipeg, Manitoba in 1982 by the late Dr. Lila Falman and a group of determined Muslim women who sought to channel their passion for faith-centered social justice work and create a more inclusive Canada for all. With 17 chapters across Canada, our mission is to affirm the identities of Canadian Muslim women and promote our lived experiences through community engagement, public policy, stakeholder engagement, and amplified awareness of the social injustices that Muslim women and girls endure in Canada, while advocating for their diverse needs and equipping local CCMW chapters with the necessary resources to maximize national efforts and mobilize local communities to join the movement. We approach our work through an intersectional lens and recognize our diverse identities and expressions. We are but one voice among many. On the evening of June 6, 2021, Talat Afzal, her son Salman, her daughter-in-law Madiha, her granddaughter Yumna, and her grandson Fayaz were out for a late spring walk in their London, Ontario neighborhood when the lives of 4 members of that beautiful family came to a crashing halt. 9-year-old Fayaz survived but remains in hospital after sustaining serious injuries. This mass murder and heinous attack was the work of a white supremacist who was filled with hate against Muslims. 3 of the 4 individuals who were murdered were women. In light of this tragedy and increasing Islamophobic attacks on Muslim women, it is appropriate that the committee undertake a study of violence against Muslim women and other targeted women, including examining online hate and cyberbullying from an intersectional perspective. With a spate of hate-motivated attacks on Black Muslim women in hijab in Calgary and Edmonton, and ongoing harassment and abuse of visible Muslim women, murder is the ultimate result of this hatred and violence. As the ultimate result of this hatred and violence is not a surprise. While we don't know what Talat, Madiha, and Yumna were wearing, they were definitely in the perpetrator's sight. I know of a family that lives steps from where this attack occurred. Women who wear headscarves in that family are afraid of leaving their home. That fear is palpable among Canadian Muslims, particularly Muslim women and girls who can be identified easily by their clothing. Gendered Islamophobia is real. As part of our Digital Anti-Racism Education or DARE project, we recently invited Canadian Muslim women, girls, trans, and non-binary individuals to share their experiences of Islamophobia with us. I have a number of examples here, but I'm going to just cite for just a few because they've already been shared by my other sisters. So here's what one said. I was sexually, physically, and verbally assaulted on the SkyTrain for wearing the hijab. In high school, two hijab-wearing Muslim girls found their shared locker broken into. Upon attempting to open the lock with their key, it got stuck as gum was stuffed inside. While they struggled to open the lock, a group of other high school kids were watching and laughing at them. Another one, while working at a comic book store, I had experienced verbal harassment by customers calling me a towelhead and a terrorist. Another one, I was verbally abused repeatedly and spat on. In elementary school, while in kindergarten, I was asked by another student if my parents were suicide bombers. These experiences are commonplace for many Muslim women and girls and are exacerbated for Muslim women with disabilities, trans, non-binary persons, and Black and Indigenous Muslim women and girls because of the multiple and intersecting disadvantages they experience in Canadian society. It is also important to recognize that 87% of Muslims are racialized, and racism is very much a part of their Canadian experience. In Quebec, the situation is even worse because of an unjust law where systemic Islamophobia is practiced in plain sight. In Quebec, while Muslim women are denied employment in the public sector because they wear a headscarf. That law gives permission to discriminate against Muslim women in the province with little chance of recourse. In addition to overt Islamophobia, at the core of this abuse and violence are sexism and misogyny. We need to understand sexism as a form of social oppression that interconnects with race, religion, class, and other systems of marginalization. Gender-based violence cannot be properly understood without addressing inequality based on race, religion, class, ability, and so on. Marginalized women experience more sexism compared to other women. For example, Black Muslim women experience almost 6 times as much sex-based discrimination compared to non-Black Muslim women. 1 in 3 Black Muslim women experience sex-based discrimination, while less than 1 in 10 non-Black Muslim women do. It is important to highlight the specific disadvantages experienced by Canadian Black Muslim women because racism, sexism, and Islamophobia manifest themselves in ways that are distinct from other Canadian Muslim women. Marginalized women experience more sexism in many places compared to other women. For example, compared to others, proportionately more Black Muslim women report experiencing discrimination in banks, stores, restaurants, when dealing with the police, and when crossing the Canadian border. While Islamophobic attacks have become a daily occurrence in Canada, gendered Islamophobia needs to be addressed distinctly because of its intersectional nature. Policy and legislative responses must take into consideration the specific circumstances of Canadian women and the effects of gendered Islamophobia on their daily lives, their performance in school, their success in the labor market, their experience of social integration, and in all sectors of Canadian society. It is not okay for a Muslim girl to have her hijab ripped off in her school. It is not okay for a Muslim woman to be assaulted on the subway. It is not okay for a Muslim woman to be denied employment because she wears a headscarf. It is not okay for a Muslim woman to be murdered because of her faith. Canada needs to pass meaningful legislation to address online hate, better reporting of hate crimes, including data collection that considers the intersectionality of Canadian Muslim women, girls, trans, and non-binary persons. White supremacist terrorists must be stopped in their tracks. Their groups must be disbanded and rendered illegal, and an active program of de-radicalization of their members must be a priority for the Canadian government. The objective of terrorists is to terrorize and frighten their targets, disempower and debilitate them. We at the Canadian Council of Muslim Women will not let the terrorists achieve their objectives. Our commitment to equality, equity, and empowerment of Canadian Muslim Women and Girls is stronger than ever, and we will continue to do whatever we can to ensure that our resolve is unshaken. We encourage members of this committee to follow our digital anti-racism education or DARE project and participate in our anti-Islamophobia and countering cyber hate workshops. You can learn more about the project and register for the workshops at our daretobeaware.ca website. We're grateful to the Department of Canadian Heritage for the financial support of this project. And incidentally, Amir Al-Ghababi is actually the facilitator for our anti-Islamophobia workshop. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Now we'll go into our first round of questions with Ms. Wong, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for allowing me to speak on this very important issue. And through you, I'd like to thank all the witnesses. While we all understand the importance of discussing this issue in our committee, I would be remiss if I did not recognize that this study was unfortunately forced by the recent attack against a Muslim family in London, Ontario. Hate is hate. In my riding Richmond Centre, we have been dealing with the rise in anti-Asian racism that has run amok among even across the nation. What my community has had to endure is beyond words. And given that knowledge, I truly understand the pain and suffering that the Muslim community in Canada is experiencing, and the pain our colleague from London, Fanshawe, must be experiencing. It is for these reasons that I would humbly request that I cede my time to Ms. Lindsay Matheson. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. We'll go to Ms. Matheson then.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Madam Wong. That it's very, very kind. And yes, my community, my hometown of London has seen such incredible violence and incredible hurt and pain in the last few weeks. But I know that that's been shared by every other community across Canada. I've heard from so many of my colleagues saying, I went to a march, I went to a vigil, people are reaching out to me, and I know that I've heard from people across this country as well, women who are scared to cross the street. And it's truly our responsibility now to try and find ways to address this adequately and quickly. I had put forward a motion last week in the House of Commons that was adopted unanimously, and it called for a national action summit on Islamophobia to be held this summer. I would like to hear from all of the witnesses, if I may, some of the measures, some of the actual actions that you want to see from this summit, and give us recommendations on how to move forward with that, if you could. Thank you.
Very good. Go ahead, Ms. El-Gawabe.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, MP Matheson, for supporting that motion for a summit on Islamophobia, and it's certainly one that is welcome. And as MP Wong mentioned, hate cuts across many communities, and we also stand in solidarity with our Asian Canadians, Black Canadians, Indigenous Canadians, Jewish Canadians. Sadly, the gamut runs long, and we know that many communities are targeted. In terms of the Summit on Islamophobia, I would like to say that solutions that I would put forward would help address hate across communities. So to address the poison essentially addresses that poison that is impacting on many communities. So to begin with, there's a few things that I would say. That the number one thing that I'd start with is, in order to fully address a problem, we need to know the full scope of it. So at the moment, as I mentioned in my intervention, we actually don't know the full scope of hate crimes and hate incidents in Canada. As I mentioned, 2/3 are not reported. So every 5 years, Statistics Canada releases what's called a victimization portion of their general social survey. It only comes out every 5 years. And in fact, the most recent one for 2021 came out in May. We still don't have the numbers. And in that victimization survey, Canadians who've experienced any type of crime self-report. And for 2014, we actually saw that 5% of all crimes people reported were hate crimes. And that basically translates to 300,000 people in Canada said they were a victim of a hate crime. So one solution to help us really grapple with this issue is to have that victimization survey released annually to help us have a better understanding. Next, I think what I would say is that, again, along with that idea of reporting, we need to remove barriers to reporting. I talked a little bit about that, but that includes, for instance, allowing for online reporting. So we're being able to report hate online. We've seen that here in Ottawa. The Ottawa Police Service has allowed for an online portal, and we could look for other ways, or third-party reporting, bolstering community organizations, providing them the support to be able to take reports of hate crimes and hate incidents in order to funnel that information back to both law enforcement locally, but also in order for our national law enforcement agencies to be tracking white supremacist groups and hate groups in this country and their activities. And finally, and there's many things, but what I would say the other thing is really to bolster our anti-racism directorate. So we know that there's a federal anti-racism directorate. It really needs to be bolstered in order to not only review internal barriers and discrimination internally within across government departments, but also to really be front-facing, public-facing, and promoting national campaigns against hate, as well as to convene summits that also look more broadly at the issue of hate, so that we can, again, bring communities together and be able to examine the different ways that people are impacted. And one more point I should say, as a board member of the Silk Road Institute, one of the things that we do is we hold programming, cultural arts programming. We are the only Muslim theater company in North America. And so with supports from government, we're able to showcase cultural arts to help win hearts and minds. There's a lot of misrepresentation of Muslim communities, just like there is of Asians, just of other minority communities. The representation is often very negative. That helps to feed that otherization and the dehumanization of various minority communities. So to bolster the funding for cultural arts and the ability to reach across communities would be also very helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Khan.
Thank you. What our sister just explained, I'd like to reiterate those points. She spoke eloquently and much to the topic. With regards to the National Summit on Islamophobia, first, we would be advocates of having whatever solutions are provided, not just being applicable to the Muslim community, but to all communities that are victim of hate. Any expression of hate has to be suppressed. Now, one thing that I would like to mention is the term Islamophobia actually doesn't really help or aid the topic. And I know it's not a term that anyone here has created, and it's something that has been accepted by pretty well everybody. But the term phobia means to be afraid of something, and then it's to be afraid of Islam and to be afraid of Muslims. And that is, in essence, a bit of a part of the problem. But nonetheless, I know it's a topic for another time. But that's all I would say right now. Thank you.
Very good. All right, and that's the end of your time, Ms. Matheson. So now we will go to Ms. Zahid for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses, my good friends, people along whom I have worked for the last many years to build a more inclusive Canada. Thank you, Madam Al-Ghawabi, for all the work which you have done to combat racism. Thank you, Mr. Khan, for building bridges. I've been at your organization many times where you have done your efforts to bring the communities together, to break these walls of hatred. So I really appreciate all the work. Thank you, Ms. Jaffrey. Recently, we were at an event together to launch the Scarborough chapter of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. So thank you for all the work which you are doing to make sure that no one in Canada feels scared or fearful, but hate crimes have been on the rise in Canada. And the last few weeks have been very difficult for all Canadians, but particularly for the Muslim community. We saw the loss of 4 innocent lives to an act of terrorism motivated by hate, Islamophobia. It was very difficult to sit there, see those 4 coffins wrapped in Canadian flag. We saw, in the days that followed, we saw Somali women wearing a hijab attacked an Edmonton mosque vandalized with swastika, and 2 people arrested following an attempted break at the Islamic Institute of Toronto. It has not been easy for all of us. So clearly these incidents show that Islamophobia exists here in Canada. Acts of hate exist. What can the federal government do to better support Muslim communities and the communities that have been targeted by these acts of hate? So maybe I can start with...
Can we start with Mr. Chowdhury because he had his hand up? I think
okay.
he had something.
Yeah, we can start with Mr. Chaudhary. Anyone can start it. Please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your kind words. Whenever we think about solutions and when we're thinking through policy, it also helps to see what are other examples of other nations and countries that have had similar situations and how do they handle it and what are the results. So as Canada will be thinking through and our government will be thinking through in the coming days and weeks, I would like to share the example of New Zealand, where in 2019, the world head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, praised the response of New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and the New Zealand government and its public in response to the terrorist attack that targeted the mosque in Christchurch. While we all know what took place, I think what's more important is the excellent and model way that the New Zealand government, and particularly the Prime Minister, had responded to the attack. And the example that she set, starting with herself, is truly praiseworthy. It has been a reaction of the highest order. And we actually think that many countries, including Canada, can learn from that. The public in New Zealand also offered its full support. The radio stations, the television stations announced that they would play the Muslim call to prayer, the azan, at the time of the Friday prayer to show their solidarity with Muslims. Further to that, non-Muslim women, including Christians, Jewish, and women of no faith, decided that they would wear the headscarf as a gesture of support and empathy, starting with the Prime Minister. So these types of actions led by the policymakers in New Zealand started at the top and it transcended all the way down society in partnership and collaboration with news and media outlets that had given that country an opportunity to be more united than ever before. So I think it's an example that Canada could certainly take some pointers from.
Great.
Ms. Al-Wabi.
Very good.
I'll let Nuzhat go before me because she didn't have a chance last time.
Okay.
Thank you, MP Zahid, for that question about what the Canadian government do. So as I mentioned in my remarks, I think it's really, really important to pass meaningful legislation to deal with online hate and also better laws to look at hate crimes in a way that is not currently available to those making complaints. Also, the way the hate crime data are captured by different police services. Well, in fact, all police services. I know that different jurisdictions have responsibility for this, but the government can lead and mandate that the data be captured in a way that takes into account the intersectionality of Canadian Muslim women and Muslims in general. I know there's a lot more to say about this, and I don't want to take up everyone else's space, but I really like the example of the government of New Zealand. I think platitudes are great, show of support are great. We saw many of the politicians come forward and demonstrate that, and we're grateful for their words of comfort and commitment to act on this. But please act. Pass the legislation necessary. Disband those hate groups because you can do that. You have the capacity to do that because they exist. They're easy to identify. Sometimes, yes, they hide in the dark corners of the net, but so many of them are visible and vocal. So please do find them. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Maintenant, nous allons...
Thank you very much. We will now move to Ms. Normanda. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for their testimony and your very personal testimony. I want to ask a fairly broad question, and I would like to hear everyone, if possible, in response. I want to take the example that Mr. Chowdhury brought up about Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson in the UK, and his remarks and their impact. And we don't have to go that far. We have heard the impact that the President of the United States has had with his remarks. So I would like to hear a little bit more about that, but also there seems to be a difference, and correct me if I'm wrong, but between hate speech and crimes in major cities and in small localities. For example, when we heard about growing up in Maple and how there didn't seem to be discrimination, much more tolerance and acceptance than in the major cities. So I would like to hear a little bit about that, and perhaps also about when children go to school, if there is easier contact when children are around other cultures and whether that has an impact when they grow up.
Amira.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, MP Normandy, for your excellent question. So I think it bears more study to look at how different communities are dealing with hate. The problem, again, goes back to that reporting. So while, we can share sort of anecdotally some of the experiences that we've had, the problem is indeed in capturing that data. And again, because we don't have third-party reporting, we're not getting reports, for instance, from community organizations or national advocacy organizations that are taking reports of hate. It's really hard for us to be able to diagnose the problem. So for this committee to think about, and for the summit eventually, how can we get better data? That's always going to really help us to understand the full extent of the problem and address the solution. And in terms of the education, so I know, for instance, that the federal government every year will send out amazing resources on Remembrance Day for teachers right across the country. These resources are posters, they're curricula, they're wonderful, wonderful ways in which teachers can talk about Remembrance Day. Similarly, it would be wonderful to see the federal government champion similar type of educational resources and supports for a national around anti-racism, anti-hate, right throughout elementary and secondary schools, and provide that as resources for teachers. Because we certainly know, I myself have done numerous workshops, like hundreds of workshops in schools, and one of the things that always strikes me is the lack of information around the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, for instance. And this is something that would be very useful and helpful for the Canadian government to ensure that our young people have full information on. The sad thing that we know is that we do see hate crimes committed by young people. The accused in London is only 20 years old. And if some of the statistics over the years in hate crimes, we've actually seen that in certain years, hate crimes were committed and perpetrated against religious communities, often by people who were under the age of 18. So there is something going on with young people and the radicalization that's happening and the hate that they are feeling towards religious minority communities. And so we really definitely need to think about that educational piece, and a national way of spreading the awareness would be a very powerful tool, I believe. Thank you.
Very good. Ms. Madi.
Thank you. I actually agree with what Ms. Al-Ghawabi just said. A lot of times the onus falls on either Muslim teachers or students to educate their classes or schools. We do have Islamic Heritage Month, and I know through School Council, I have put up posters and made presentations for our schools and helped to, spread information, but it shouldn't be only when there is a Muslim volunteer that is available. It should be done through the education system, because it is true that this is starting at a very young age. And because social media is so unmonitored, these young children are reading these hateful things, and they are the ones, like I mentioned, my daughters in elementary school were called those racist remarks and were referred to as terrorists. And I think that prior to 9/11, which was my experience growing up in Canada, there wasn't that much hate in Canada outwardly expressed towards Muslims. That's my experience. But after that, the media played a big role in promoting that false narrative of Muslims being terrorists. And that's when the name calling started. And that's when people began to feel that it was okay to mimic what they heard in the media. And when I see politicians that are wearing the headscarf and people who are in leadership positions, it is inspiring for us and our daughters to say, okay, we also want to go in those leadership positions, but if they are not being protected, then it is very disheartening.
Bon, c'est la fin de votre temps. We'll go now to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many of the witnesses, you've talked about meaningful legislation. So we have in Canada right now, the government has set up that national anti-racism strategy, but many organizations, national organizations, have actually called for that meaningful legislation to follow it. So the two pieces that, of course, we hear most of are a national anti-racism act and an online hate act. Maybe if the witnesses could talk about that specifically and the timelines on that, what they'd like to see from that, and how important that is.
Starting with Ms. Jaffrey. You're on mute.
So thank you so much for those questions. I wanted to talk about, sorry, can I go back to what we were talking about before, the education? I think it's really important for all of this education to begin very early. I want to give you an example of how a change can happen. So I have 2 grandchildren, and they're doing online learning right now. And you know, in their classroom, they do a land acknowledgement now. You know, that's part of their routine, their opening exercises. So, you know, things like celebrating other faiths, you know, festivals or religious occasions, learning about them. You know, there are many, many ways of doing this. But one other thing about where the interaction occurs. So depending on where you are, unfortunately, the proximity to people of different faiths is not enough, because we have communities where we have very large populations of Muslims, and there the experiences can be as unpleasant and unwelcome as in rural communities. So at every level, leaders in the community have to act in a way that promotes inclusion of all communities. So I think going back to the idea of an anti-racism act or other legislation, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about, and that is we need legislation perhaps that is very specific to gender-based violence, that incorporates the experiences of diverse Muslim communities or Muslim women in the legislation and any policy work that is done. So besides the racism aspect, the intersectional aspects of gender and other identities have to be incorporated in any legislation or policy that the government undertakes. Thank you.
Mr. Khan.
Thank you. As mentioned from my colleague earlier, words really do matter. Hate was allowed to rise to the surface because of certain political figures, you know, especially to the south of us and overseas, as mentioned. And prior to that, suppressing hate existed all over, you know, especially in Western countries. And it took decades for us to, you know, to lower hate and to try to eradicate it. And it's now going to take many more years to resuppress this hate that is allowed to simmer back up. This is where Canada's leaders calling out the world on all forms of injustices, not just hate, all forms of injustices. This is what will help change hearts and minds. It has to happen all over the world. Our leaders have to lead by example. They have to be the ones to change hearts globally. Canada's main export to the world should be our love for humanity and our call against injustices. Our community, the Ahmadi Muslim Jamaat, is going to be launching something called the Love for All initiative, and we'll share some of those ideas with you. But it's not just for Islamophobia, but for all expressions of hate and injustices that we're going to try to do our part to help, of course, simmer all of this. Also, our own community is going to be having a conference to better provide suggestions for this national summit that's coming up. So we'll have some concrete suggestions to forward as well. Thank you.
Very good. And Ms. Al-Gawabi.
Yes, thank you so much, MP Matheson, for that question. I do believe the Anti-Racism Directorate should be entrenched in legislation. I think it's so important to hopefully maintain such a part of the government and to ensure that that work continues regardless of who is holding power in our government, and that it must not be politicized. I think one of the most difficult things that our communities have faced in previous years is a politicization of the word, even Islamophobia, of the term. And so what I would just urge all committee members here is to really think very much about how indeed leaders do talk about our communities, as was mentioned earlier by Witness Khan. The way that we are described in media, the rhetoric, the political rhetoric does have a direct impact on our communities. And so it really is very important that our political leaders do speak in inclusive language, because I will tell you that firsthand experience shows that when we do hear from our political leaders with inclusive language, with respect for all people who live in Canada, their backgrounds, we really do feel a change in tenor. And on the flip side, when our communities are, treated as under suspicion, there's a wonderful report called by the RCP called Words Make Worlds, where it talks about, for instance, the way that communities can be scapegoated, for instance. This really does have a direct impact, not just on us as adults, but especially on our children, who are really deeply impacted and hurt by the way our communities can sometimes be described. And so legislating this is going to be so important, an anti-racism directorate, as well as, of course, that online hate that we have been waiting for. Thank you.
Excellent. Very well said. I think we'll leave it there for this panel, but I want to thank all of the witnesses for what you've said. And I want to let you know as well, and the rest of the committee, that for the next panel, one of our witnesses is not able to show up. And so if you want to stay, then at the will of the committee, I would invite you to stay, and then we perhaps would have an opportunity to ask even more questions then.
Just one point of question.
Sure.
Yes, just wanted to request the witnesses, because I think time was less and there were so many things which we needed to discuss. If they have some recommendations or suggestions which we should look into and they have not been able to discuss it today, if they can send us some written submissions so that we can take into consideration their recommendations as
Absolutely.
we go through this report, because I felt that time was very less. I had
Yes.
many questions which I was not able to ask today. So it would be good if they can send us some written submissions.
Yeah, I think it would be good, and you can direct those to the clerk. And I would add that we are also putting up on the webpage a call for briefs from one-page summaries from many people across the country as well. All right, so we'll suspend briefly and do the sound check for the next witness. new witness, who's Samia Hassan, the Executive Director of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And Samia will give you 5 minutes to make your opening remarks, and then we'll go into questions. You may begin.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel today. And I really appreciate the timing that this invitation has come in. As mentioned, my name is Samia Hassan, and I am the Executive Director of the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. CASA is a social justice umbrella agency supporting the well-being of South Asians in Canada. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, which is covered by the Williams Treaty, and the colonial name of this place is called Durham Region. It's a difficult moment for me to speak today as the entire Muslim community in Canada grieves for the loss of the Afzal family, as we witness the hate crimes against Black Muslim women in Alberta, as we see videos circulating on social media celebrating the London terrorist attack, and as we hear about the violent threats being made to a number of mosques in the GTA. But I'm present here today to support our communities at this difficult time with hopes that the 4 Muslim Canadian lives lost will be far too many for our political leaders, and urgent action will be taken to reassure the Muslim community once again that we are safe in this country. The disproportionate impact of Islamophobia on Muslim women has been widely documented in Europe, the United States, and Canada. Clearly, Islamophobia is a gendered crisis. It operates according to gendered stereotypes of Muslim men as violent, terrorist, and abusive, and as Muslim women as accomplices or oppressed. This is especially true for visibly Muslim women who choose to wear the niqab or the hijab due to preconceived notions that Muslim women have been forced to dress this way by patriarchal systems. In fact, in a survey published by the Toronto Star in 2017, 56% of Canadians believe that Islam suppresses women. On the contrary, there is very little understanding or recognition of the worldwide movement of Muslim women to wear the hijab as a sign of empowerment. These stereotypes of Muslim women in policies, political rhetoric, and the media leads to increased Islamophobic incidents against visibly Muslim women. One such policy was the now dismantled Barbaric Cultural Practices Act of 2015. Due to the limited time I have today, I'm not going to talk about the online hate component, as I know my colleagues have probably discussed it, and my sister Amira Al-Gawabi has talked about that in length. For a long time, we shamed France for its anti-hijab and anti-niqab policies. Yet we have a province in our own country which passed unconstitutional policies without any evidence of harm to society on what Muslim women can or cannot wear. In these policies, we see the height of a hypocrisy of modern white feminism, which is led mainly by white women to the exclusion and detriment of visibly Muslim women and other racialized women who feel empowered by their faith and choose to wear the hijab or the niqab. On the other hand, widely believed stereotypes of Muslim women as being oppressed in their own communities does not do Muslim women any favors. In fact, it is the state that passed the Islamophobic policies, and that is the state that is oppressing Muslim women by limiting their freedom to choose. It is the state that oppresses women by sitting idle while their human and constitutional rights are being abused, and doors to opportunities in this country are being closed to them just because they choose to dress a certain way. This is systematic social and economic exclusion of visibly Muslim women. Yet we are silent. Decades of being exposed and victimized by Islamophobia, described in detail by my other colleagues today, has led many Muslim women to feel unsafe, defensive, distrustful, and afraid that anything that they say or do can be used against their communities by the media. To address this crisis, I urge this government to work with the Muslim women, work with Muslim-led community groups and organizations to combat Islamophobia with a focus on the gendered impact of this crisis. I urge this government to work with the provinces to mandate community-informed education curriculum on Islamophobia, among other areas of anti-racism, such as anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, especially in public schools, so our children can grow up to respect people of all faiths, cultures, and races. And finally, and most importantly, I urge this government to implement restrictions on online hate and legislate penalties now for social media platforms for not shutting down hate content. I'm going to end today with the brilliant words of Dr. Yasser Hadara from Hamilton, from an article I read earlier this week. Our leaders must take
the needed hard look in the mirror. They must take responsibility for their own actions and of those of their political parties and supporters. They must commit to do better, and they absolutely must do better. Hate thrives in the dark. We fight it with transparency, accountability, and equality before the law. No more special laws with reference to Bill 21. No more secret audits with reference to the report from last week showing the CRA unfairly targeting Muslim charities over the last decade. No more double standards. Anything less, and I fear will soon stand again in yet another Canadian city to mourn more Canadians lost. Thank you for your time.
Very good. Thanks so much. Now we're going to begin our rounds of questioning, and we'll start with Ms. Sahota for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the witnesses who appeared on the last panel and this panel as well. Thank you for being here. And my heartfelt condolences to the Muslim community. I'm so sorry for what happened. I come from a family where my mom wore a scarf, and my grandma, who is 87 years old, will not step out of the house or even inside the house without her scarf. I remember my mom in the hospital. She passed away when we were fairly young. The scarf was so important to her. The doctors told us she's unconscious, but she would grab her scarf and cover her head. I know the importance. I have, my grandpa wore a turban all his life. Dad wears turban. My brother also wears a turban. And even as an older sister, I still am very protective towards my brother. He's much older, he's a physician, but I still feel the need to protect him because it's visible. The turban is visible. So I'm so sorry this is the Canada we live in right now, but we need to change it. And I'm so thankful you guys are here giving your opinions and giving us recommendations, because that's how the change will begin. And I am in agreement with any change that has to happen has to start at a young age. I also believe that even when you talk about gender equality, we need to get younger kids involved in that, just as they should respect, they expect their rights to be respected. They need to do the same for others. This all needs to begin to start at a young age. Sorry, I'm getting emotional, but I'm really hurt by what I see. I've gone to the rallies that were held in response to what was happening to Asian Canadians here. I'm hurt that took place. One of my favorite quotes is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And I like to believe and live with those, with that in mind. So the questions I'm going to ask is around how you feel like as Muslim women and being targeted. What are the effects of this hate crime on you? How do you feel when that happens? Because in order for us to make any kind of change, we need to first know what it feels like to have to go through that. And some of us on this committee do understand what you go through, but I'd like to hear it from you. What do women feel when they're targeted, go through this hate crime, or all the, even as young kids when they wear hijab, go to school and they're targeted? If you can speak to that, I would appreciate that.
Good. Could we start with Mrs. Han, and then we'll go over to Amira.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question, MP Sahota. It's very difficult to describe in words how a woman feels when she goes through that. But I can just say the entire community is shaken to the core by what happened. And it's not easy at all. I've got a 7-year-old daughter as well. And just trying to understand how to explain to her that she's not safe is very difficult. People are feeling scared. I've talked to colleagues that are telling their family members not to go out for a walk. People are taking off their hijabs for fear of their safety. So it's not what we want for this country. And it's not why people immigrated to this country.
For sure.
We came here to feel safe, and right now the community does not feel safe.
And Ms. Mahdi.
Yes, just like Ms. Hassan just said that, and as I mentioned, as Ahmadi Muslims, many of us escaped religious persecution in our homelands to come to Canada to feel safe. And, you know, when these types of things happen, it really affects us deeply and personally. And speaking in reference to children, my daughter was in grade 6, actually, and she had started wearing the hijab. And the first day, somebody said, "Oh, are you a terrorist now?" And she was so upset because as a young child, they don't have that, you know, confidence yet. They don't have that deep understanding. And it made her really upset. And the next day, the same boy tried to yank it off of her head. And it you know, it was handled very well. The principal handled it very well. I'm thankful for that. But the point is that when a child goes through something like this, it makes them question everything. It doesn't just affect them that this was one person who did one thing and, you know, he apologized and it's all good. It makes them question their identity, their religion, their everything. And as they grow up, if they continue to see these things happen, they don't know what their identity is. And it becomes very difficult for them because now they will be in a conflict between what they feel they should be doing and what they feel will keep them safe. So it's very important that the schools, the teachers, the educators make sure that those places are safe for our children.
All right, and that's the time on that question. We'll go next to Ms. Dillon for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Our previous panel, this panel, has very eloquently stated the harassment, the violence, the discrimination, the hatred they have all faced. It's very, very difficult for all of you to speak of this, and we are all cognizant of this in this committee. It's very, very troublesome. It's very, very hurtful, the things we hear, the things that people, visible minorities, those wearing religious symbols wear. I'd like to start my question, and this is maybe for everybody, or we could start with Miss Amira. Please, if you could talk to us a little bit about intersectionality, Black women who wear hijabs, the treatment statistically that was spoken of that they are subjected to. Please, if you could speak to us a little bit about the intersectionality of racism and religious discrimination. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So I know that Nushat is still on the call as well, and the Canadian Council of Muslim Women has done a lot of work on that. But what I can certainly say, MP Dillon, thank you so much for the question, is that absolutely when we're talking about hate crimes specifically and the hate that's targeting our communities, an issue that Nushat had raised that I have seen firsthand in my work with police services is that when someone reports a hate crime to police, basically police, if you can imagine, sort of check boxes of identities that they have to check off. So for instance, if someone is both Asian and Muslim and they report a hate incident or hate crime to the police can only choose one box. Right across the country, it's only one box. That means that we are not capturing the intersectional nature of hate in our communities. That's just a very basic example, because as you know, that people can be targeted for multiple identities. For instance, if a man with a turban is targeted because he was perceived as a Muslim, which box will it be? Right? That's the question. And so these are sort of different things just to think about in terms of examples of how our institutions are still catching up to understanding the intersecting identities that people hold. Before I cede the rest to Nushat to speak more to that, I would also just like to urge the committee, and it's sort of why I tried to stay around, and Samia has raised it as well very eloquently. It would be such a powerful statement from this committee for it to condemn Bill 21. Bill 21 is essentially state-sanctioned discrimination against Muslim women, as well as other visible minority communities, including Jewish, Quebec communities, including the Sikh community, anyone who wants to wear a religious piece of clothing and continue to contribute as any other Quebecer has the right to. And so when we're telling our children that they can grow up to be whoever they want to be, to participate however they want to be, that is true for everyone in Canada, except if you're living in Quebec. And it is definitely an erosion of the human rights and freedoms that we all cherish, and certainly has a disproportionate impact on Muslim women and girls. And a statement from this committee would be very welcome. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I address the question?
Absolutely.
Thank you, MP Dillon, for that question. And so I mentioned, the intersectionality aspect is very, very important. One thing you've probably seen, during this panel, and you probably experienced it in your communities, Muslims are not a monolith. They're extremely diverse, racially, economically, ethnically, how they dress, it's very, very, sometimes you don't know what the multiple identities are of an individual. So that's why this cannot be sort of a straightforward, a strategy to end Islamophobia or deal with Islamophobia. It has to take into consideration the diversity of Muslims, and then within the diverse communities of Muslims, the specific intersectionalities of Muslim women. And that could be anything. It could be, whether they have a disability, it could be their race. And I mentioned the stats related to Black Muslim women. So, you've seen the stats, you've seen the incidents and media reports about the Black Muslim women that have been attacked in Alberta. And that happens to those communities here as well in Ontario. So it's not a surprise, but it's the intersection of race, of gender, their visibility as Muslims. So Islamophobia is at play, but also the perception that people have about Muslim women, as oppressed, as weak, unable to take care of themselves and defend themselves. So they're targeted because they're perceived to be weak, where nothing can be farther from the truth. But the purpose of the terrorists is to terrorize, to inculcate fear in those communities. And yeah, you'll start fearing. You'll start being afraid to wear your religious symbol or your hijab on your head because you can be attacked. And that's what we need to fight. That's what we need to counter. And sorry.
I have to go. I will just take my leave, but thank you very much again for the opportunity.
Thank you so very much. Yes, no, thank you very much, both of you. That is wonderful to have you. Thank you. Maintenant, nous allons...
We will now go to Ms. Normandin for 6 minutes again. Thank you. It's Ms. Larouche. In fact, I'm back. Welcome, Madame Larouche. You have a motion that is certainly of interest to us at the at FEWO, and there I had to be elsewhere for the first hour. So I want to thank the witnesses. We certainly all agree that hate and Islamophobia has no place in our country in 2021. And I want to reach out to my colleague from London and express our solidarity to her and the entire community. So this is the first time I've had a chance to speak in this debate here today. Now, we've heard something very interesting from Ms. Hassan, and that is about the diversity, rather, from Ms. Jaffrey. And you talked about diversity. How can we take that into account when we promote education and exchanges? So I would like to hear a little bit more about diversity from you.
Ms. Hassan.
I'll just fill in for Nusrat. I know she had to leave. Thank you for your question, and that's a very important question. We've been talking about diversity within racialized communities. So as an organization that serves South Asians, we know firsthand that South Asian communities often are mistaken as a monolith, where we're not. There's so much diversity within our communities, and the same goes for the Muslim community. There's even more diversity there in terms of the countries that people come from, the color of their skin, the culture that they practice, the language that they speak, their level in terms of their socioeconomic status, their belief system within Islam. So Islam, there's it's a spectrum of different beliefs too, right? So it's not everybody doesn't have the same beliefs. Their school of thought within that belief system. So it's extremely diverse. And I think the best way to go about creating policies and programs and curriculum is for it to be community led. And to work with Muslim leaders and Muslim organizations, work with diverse Muslim organizations. We've had a diversity of Muslim organizations here on the panel, and see how they want those policies and those programs and those curriculum to be created, developed. And just like with a lot of policies with Indigenous communities, it's so important for them to be Indigenous led. And the same goes for the Muslim community. Any policy or program that is created, being an outsider from the community, you're not going to be able to understand the diversity and all the different opinions. I'm a Muslim person, and I don't know all of the different opinions, right? So I can't be a representative of all Muslims in Canada. So I think that is something that should be taken into account, and policymakers should be mindful of.
J'entends bien dans ce que vous dites l'importance de.
If I understand correctly, it is important to take into account the different points of view because Islam is not a monolith, and so I take that to heart. I would also like, because here we are at the Status of Women Committee, I have heard that when it comes to institutions, whether we're talking about the RCMP, or the military, that there are problems. So these are federal institutions. How can we promote greater diversity, different faces in those institutions, and more openness through education?
Pas quel témoin il reste en ce moment.
Great. So I think in terms of institutions, we've had a really great relationship with the Anti-Racism Secretariat at the federal level. And one of the things that we have been discussing with them is working with all departments across the federal government. So if there are principles, if there are policies that the Anti-Racism Secretariat is setting up, for example, collection of race-based disaggregated data, it should be across all federal departments and institutions. So I think really, like Amira said this morning, bolstering the Anti-Racism Secretariat, giving them the resources that they need, to specialize in the different forms of, unfortunately, the different forms of racism and hate that exist in this country. It really needs to be well resourced and to tackle this. And I think they would be the body to handle that kind of work, to work across institutions at the federal level, across departments, on all forms of racism and hate.
Pour vous, ce secrétariat-là?
Okay, that's good for that secretariat. Is there other action that the federal government could take to prevent hate and to support various communities across the country so that they can be more visible and so that we can prevent these kinds of problems? Are there other things that the federal government could do?
Very brief answer, please.
Sure. One of if I was to choose one thing, I would say it's the online hate legislation. So we know that a lot of the radicalization and anti-Muslim hate is spreading online. And if it's now or never. We really need that legislation that we've been waiting for a very long time to mandate social media platforms to shut down hate. And if they don't, penalties should be assigned to them if they don't. So definitely that online hate legislation is the biggest ask from myself, and I know a lot of the panelists as well.
Very good. Then we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know, Mrs. Sun, you were listening, but you weren't necessarily as active in the first hour when I asked all the witnesses to comment on that National Action Summit, and I asked, what recommendations, what actions you wanted to see from that summit, or I asked them, and I would like to ask you. Understanding, of course, that it can be extremely complicated. You talked about the diversity within communities, but that it being community-led, if you could provide some other recommendations that you would like to see come out of that summit, I would appreciate that.
Sure. I think going back to some of the recommendations that we've made, we've actually submitted a list of 7 recommendations to the Minister of Justice and Attorney General back in 2020. And I believe we met as well, MP Matheson, about those recommendations. Again, first and foremost, the online hate legislation is paramount and it's critical and it's urgent for that to be implemented. And I know Amira spoke a little bit about the victimization portion of the GSS, the General Social Survey, having that implemented annually so that we can collect better data on what is going on around hate crimes and hate speech and hate incidents so that we can create better policies to combat it. And in terms of, and we know that we had that discussion at length this morning around mandating curriculum in schools, working with the provinces. I know it is within the jurisdiction of the provinces, working with the provinces to ensure that we have anti-racism curriculum, not just diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism, which is great, and it happens across the board. In Canada, where we celebrate different faiths, we celebrate differences, but actually anti-racist and anti-oppressive approaches. And some of the witnesses here this morning mentioned it starts in the school system. I grew up in the public school system as well, and I can't count on my fingers the number of times that I had Islamophobic incidents and hate and physical violence against myself as a visibly Muslim student. So those are definitely things that ourselves as CASA have been asking for. We're also part of a larger group called the Anti-Hate Community Leaders Group. It's a group of over 40 organizations and individuals across Canada that have been pushing for anti-hate legislation and anti-hate policies. And we need to send a strong message through this summit. And I know it was mentioned this morning as well, from all leaders in this country that Islamophobia will not be tolerated. We've seen on social media, there have been some individuals that have been celebrating the London terrorist attack. There needs to be strong condemnation of those individuals. We need to see that those individuals face consequences for spreading that hate, because that's where it starts. It starts online, it starts in schools.
Yes, unfortunately, and it was mentioned as well when yes, those leaders come out and are racist. It gives permission almost, and I know that I've certainly heard that. My office has heard that, unfortunately, and we are trying to report that as much as possible. But I think it was stated by my leader that hate is like a fire, and if you don't extinguish it quickly, it does spread far too quickly. I wanted to just expand on some of those pieces of legislation that we were talking about before and that you just mentioned now. One of the things that we often hear about too is the Employment Equity Act. And we know that women, of course, are still paid a great deal less, but of course it's even more so when you are a racialized woman. So if you could talk about the strengthening of the Federal Employment Equity Act and attaching equity measures to all federal investments, recovery programs that we're seeing coming out of COVID to ensure racialized groups and other underrepresented groups have that equality and access to employment, but also to those resources.
Thank you for that question, MP Matheson. So that is very much connected to the anti-racism efforts that we need to really need to step up on. Employment equity, as you know, during the pandemic, we've seen racialized communities being disproportionately impacted by COVID, partly as a result of them being overrepresented in frontline precarious labor. CASA did a study over the last 3 years on South Asian immigrants in Toronto and them trying to secure decent employment. And one of the things that we found that despite having amazing credentials, having a great education, either from here or from back home, they're still struggling to secure decent employment. So I'm talking about even something that is above minimum wage. So it's very difficult. And you were right about the gendered aspect of employment equity. Women face even more barriers, especially women that have language barriers, women that are not as fluent in English, or are at home for a long time to take care of household responsibilities and then want to come back into the workforce. There's not a lot of training opportunities for women that have scheduling conflicts. So there's a lot of barriers that racialized women face. And I think that should be an important part of the employment equity legislation. I think also working with the province on an employment equity legislation, because we know if at the federal level, it will only cover a certain portion of the Canadian public, but it won't cover all of it. So working with provinces as well to push for an employment equity legislation on that front.
Very good. Now we're going to go to Ms. Wong for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I like to move on with something we have already touched, and that is about cyber violence and cyber bullying. Now, because of COVID, a lot of us, are online and doing Zooming, and also a lot of our children, young people, and and people of ages spend a lot of time online. And definitely that is one of the reasons of the consequence of COVID. So my question is, does the persistence of cyber violence and cyberbullying contribute to other forms of violence or hate crimes in Canada? If you think so, how? To both our witnesses, please.
All right, I know I've spoken a lot. Do you want to go, Sadia?
Ms. Mahdi, yeah, Sadia.
Yes, thank you. Definitely the cyberbullying aspect is very real. With the past year, the pandemic has moved a lot of our kids online. I think reporting tools would be something that would be needed because not every child is going to go to their parents and open up and tell them what is going on. And like Ms. Hassan mentioned, many parents might not have that language to then go and speak to the educators about it. So these types of incidents, cyberbullying as well as the other, as we were speaking before, the reporting has to be something that is accessible. It is something that is communicated to the children, to the students, the educators, that anything that happens, why is such a small percentage of these hate crimes being reported? It needs to be a safe place. People should be able to express what is happening, and then they should have the confidence that it will be taken care of and addressed. So I know in our school board, the York Region District School Board, they have a button on their main website, and it's called Report It. Unfortunately, many kids joke that nothing's going to happen. So I don't want to use this button and maybe put myself in a situation where I'm vulnerable, and now I've made this claim and nothing's going to be done about it. So it falls back onto those leadership positions to tell the children, the students, that we are going to do something about it. We will address your concerns. And then into the policing aspect, if the police are trained with all of these issues that we've been talking about, intersectionality and the different types of Muslims, the different types of faces of Muslims, and they are being told that you need to change your approach to the way that you're dealing with these communities, that they're not feeling safe, that they are reporting these hateful incidents, then that would be, I think, a good first step, and then it'll trickle down to the community.
Thank you for that insight, and that leads to my next question. If an adults feel that there's no use if you even report, that's why all these hate crimes, especially against women, are underreported, because they even the police tell them that, well, sorry, just stay away from them. When they come your way, you just go away. I think this doesn't send a good message to those who are under such pressure. So what would you suggest that the justice system should really look into that, to make sure that no crime is a small crime, no hate is a small hate, that it also helps to prevent what's going to happen to marginalized women, and especially in our study right now, women of Muslim faith. So again, I open this question to both our witnesses. Thanks.
Yes. So do I have time to answer? Sorry, you're on mute.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead. Thank you. I'm just thinking of the program that we have in Ontario. I don't know if it's other places, but there's a VIP program that the police conduct in schools, and it's about drugs and influences and values, influences, and peers is what the acronym is about. And the reason it came to my mind is that when a policeman walks into a classroom, especially of sixth graders, let's say, they hold a really big, they can create a big impact with what they say. And if they come to speak to, each classroom and talk about hate crimes and talk about Islamophobia or anti-Black racism, it's going to have a great impact on those young minds. So when we see resources being, used for specific areas, we can see the effects, because I can see how much that impacted my children, even myself as a child, listening to those police officers and talking about, making the right choices. So if we see that, nationally, this has become a very big problem, maybe those types of programs need to be done, and it needs to be done in a very small, one-on-one type of classroom setting. And leaders like police officers can really make a big difference if they come in and they speak about what actually is a hate crime, and what would happen if somebody felt that way, if they were at a young age they were targeted, and what type of effects that would have on them, or vice versa, the person who's doing the hate or the cyberbullying, what would happen to them. I think it could have a really big impact.
Very good. Now we're going to go to Ms. Hutchings, and I think you're sharing your time with Ms. Sidhu and others. Ms. Saeed. Go ahead, Ms. Scott. Oh,
I'm starting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, you're starting. Good.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we know, our Muslim community has not even had a chance to recover from the hateful act of terror in London, Ontario. Then last week, our Muslim sister wearing her hijab was assaulted in Edmonton. And earlier this week, Battle Hadi Mosque in Edmonton was vandalized. All these horrible incidents have no place in Canada, and my heart breaks for all victims of these recent attacks. I know many Canadians are feeling the same. To all witnesses today, we know that our marginalized and racialized communities are looking for allies in government, and they are looking for solution. You shouldn't feel unsafe on the streets in Canada if you are wearing a turban, kippah, hijab, indigenous regalia, or any other religious culture symbol. We need to stand up to reject racism and terror and work together. The goal of this study in our committee is to find those solutions. So my question is to Ms. Maddie. Anyone can also contribute if someone else want to. I know your organization advocates for peace, tolerance, love, and understanding among followers of different faiths. It is important to understand the root causes of hate. What are some of the differences in experience with hate crimes when it comes to socioeconomic status? You talked about the school kids, how we can empower them, to educate them, to give the awareness so they are empowered to speak up.
Thank you for your question. I think that education is key. Spreading information is key. Removing myths and misconceptions. As you mentioned, our community does hold a lot of public events in which we try to address those misconceptions and try to remove those barriers. But again, that would be on our platform. It needs to be done on a larger platform. And seeing the House of Commons committee doing this great work is actually very encouraging to us, because definitely you can reach a larger, audience within the Canadian community. I think that it's very important that we understand that the hate comes from a place of ignorance. And unfortunately, going back to the online web pages, Facebook groups, or whatever, they're free to, express those horrific thoughts, and that's where the radicalization happens. And the London, Ontario attacker, him being 19 or 20 years old, shows that that young mind is the one that is being influenced the most, and perhaps haven't ever met a Muslim, haven't actually asked those questions, and, oh, I heard this, could you clear it up for me? Also going back to the Quebec mosque shooting, yes, it was addressed. Prime Minister Trudeau addressed it, and it was, in the media. But then what happened after that? It fell back on the communities to, step up their security. And we were very scared to go back to the mosque after that, thinking, is that going to happen when our, children are attending prayer services? So it can't be something that just dies down because the media coverage has died down. It has to be a continuous, actual, an increase in the good so that we can decrease the bad.
Ms. Hassan.
So, just very quickly, one thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the burden on the communities to eradicate the misconceptions. I think really feeling it, the community really feels that it is their responsibility to eradicate those myths and misconceptions and stereotypes. And I really feel that's unfair because we were not the ones that created those in the first place. So why should we be responsible for telling people that we're not terrorists, right? So it should come from the top down. It should really come from a campaign from the federal government to show that our communities, are welcoming, are nice people, are good citizens of this country, and that burden shouldn't fall on the communities themselves. The other thing that I wanted to just point out very quickly is in terms of the previous question on cyber hate and hate crime reporting. One of the projects that we're doing here at CASA is to work with 4 different police units across Ontario to see how their hate crime reporting system works at present, and where the gaps exist, and how the community envisions those programs to be, and what would be an accessible way for communities to report hate crimes, as as we know that 2/3 of hate crimes across the country are unreported. How do we change that? And we're a small organization. We can only do so much and work with certain police services across the province. If there's a way for the federal government to take that initiative to work with police units across the country to have a streamlined approach for people to report hate crimes. And then the second part of it is public education about how to report on hate crimes. When we had an experience a couple of weeks ago where we had an event and there were two people that Zoom bombed the event with profanities against the speakers. One of them was a South Asian woman. And we had a very difficult time trying to find out how to report that to the police. It was a hate incident, it was hate speech, but we were kind of pushed from one department to another department, from one police unit to another police unit. And it's then people, and as an organization, we have the resources to assign staff to do that. But as an individual, people don't have the time or the energy to invest, hours on end on trying to report the crime. So it's left unreported. So really working with the police to see how we can make this system more community friendly and accessible.
Very good. Now we'll go to Madame LaRouche, 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses once again for their testimony here at the committee. I want to come back to something we've already talked about, because in Quebec right now, there is a great deal of talk about online hate. And even women in politics, when we talk about changing things through education and other ways, but there are women in municipal politics who aren't going to run next time because they've been the objects of online hate. So I would like to hear from one or the other of the witnesses about the online hate that we see at the federal level and at the Public Security Committee. We heard about during the COVID period, we've had a lot of radicalization through online propaganda, and we've talked about it here as well. So I would like to hear from either of you about that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, I mentioned it earlier. Representation matters. And for me, as a Muslim woman, when I see the wonderful MPs that are now serving Canada, that are women of color, that are Muslims, that are hijab wearing, it really makes me feel good about Canada and our government. But when we hear that they're being attacked, they're being, threatened, and then they have to leave their posts, it doesn't, bode well for the, encouragement for others to follow in their footsteps. So if we see that they are being protected, that those attacks are being taken seriously and being removed, then we will see more people who will step up into those leadership roles and will want to represent their communities. And when we see a greater representation in our politicians, we will, automatically see a very different face to the leadership of this community. And already we've done so well. But in the future, it needs to be, it needs to be addressed, and we can definitely encourage our younger generation to then step up and fill those roles.
And quickly from Ms. Hassan.
Thank you for that question. One of the really disturbing stats that I have come across is that there are over 200 white supremacist extreme right-wing groups in action right now in Canada. And the federal government, as mentioned in the previous panel, has the power to dismantle them and disband them. And so a lot of the online hate comes from that extreme right-wing white supremacist groups that are just running freely right now. So there needs to be strong action to disband all of those groups. And I assure you that once we come to that, there will be a lot less online hate, especially that's targeted towards women and racialized women and Muslim women online. We know that racialized women and Muslim women face a disproportionate amount of cyberbullying and cyber hate, and women in general face a lot of hate online. So the answer is in your hands as the federal government to disband those 200 plus white supremacist extreme right-wing groups.
Very good. Now we'll go to Ms. Matheson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to return to some of the discussion on the hate crime units with policing, that reporting system. Absolutely, I agree with you, Mrs. Sun, about that public education piece. We don't know. I think part of that too, it comes in like this is how you report it, but that education of why is it so important for you to report it. One of the things that the NDP has been calling for and wants to move forward on is also expanding that, because so many smaller cities, but across Canada, even medium-sized cities, municipalities, they don't have anything like a hate crime unit. And could you talk about the importance of the federal government ensuring that police units across the country have that funding for those specific hate crime units? Both actually witnesses, sorry.
I think it's very, very important, and we know that hate crime is not just something that happens in large cities. There is a lot of hate crime. We've seen on social media people that have moved into smaller rural towns during the pandemic have faced a lot of hate and a lot of racism in those communities. So again, I stand by having a streamlined approach from the federal government to support police units to establish hate crime units across the country, and to provide those resources that are necessary. The other important thing is having a hate crime unit on its own is not enough. We've had police units that have had hate crime units, but the staff that were responsible for that unit were not trained at all on how to handle complaints. And it is a very sensitive job for people to be talking to people that have faced violence in that way. And so training is a huge component as well. So I think just not just resourcing and providing funds for those police units to create hate crime units, but also having a centralized training system for those hate crime staff to take in reports and to be sensitive to issues around the different forms of hate that people experience.
Very good. And so with the remaining time, I think we have time for one question from Ms. Shin and one question from Ms. Zahid, I think. Ms. Shin.
Thank you so much. And first, I would like to express my sadness with the recent tragic deaths of the 4 Muslim family members in London, and that I so appreciate all the witnesses who are here in the earlier panel and in this current one for making time to speak with us today. I know that with the rise of racism in general, anti-Asian hate crimes, specifically in my part of Canada, in the Greater Vancouver area, one of the things that keeps coming up, and you've touched on this a little bit already, is we can't urge anyone because you don't have a witness, or it wasn't an actual physical, a form of assault that can be charged. So a lot of times victims walk away feeling very angry, more angry, very afraid and powerless, and that, the world is not safe and no one can really do anything about it. I know you mentioned the idea of the hate crime unit. If you can provide more details, what kinds of things can be done to help those who are walking away without any justice at that moment?
Mrs. Sun.
So one of the biggest barriers, after talking to different police units in the work that we are doing, one of the biggest barriers in charging someone with a hate crime is the requirement of having attorney general consent for that to be considered a hate crime. And what we've asked for is for some transparency around what is considered a hate crime and what is given the attorney general consent and what is not given attorney general consent. We, as the anti-hate community leaders group, have not advocated for removing that that requirement to have attorney general consent, but to have some more transparency and an annual reporting mechanism of what has been given consent and what is not, so that the community can then have a better understanding of how that system works. And I think when we have transparency around something, there will be better principles that are applied. There will be consistent principles that are applied to what is considered hate crime and what is not. And I totally hear you, MP Shin, that there are people that go in to report a hate crime and they're told that unfortunately they're not able to consider whatever reason, because it is right now for any crime to be considered a hate crime. So looking back at some of those gaps in those policies and to see how we can eliminate some of those gaps, how to make the process more transparent, that community groups like CASA can then and educate the community on what they need to do to report hate crimes, so what factors they need to fulfill before they go to the police and report hate crimes. And the other thing that was discussed this morning, I think third-party reporting is so important, because as we know, there's a lot of communities don't have a lot of trust in the law enforcement. You know, with the Muslim community, especially with Muslim women, they're afraid of being labeled as being shamed and victim blamed. So that is a real thing, and we need to really see how we can improve that entire system of reporting, so that communities have better trust in the law enforcement when they go and report hate crimes. And if they're not comfortable reporting it to law enforcement, there should be third-party mechanisms for organizations that are doing close work with the community already. There's a lot of organizations that we work with. Given some resources, they would be more than happy to take on that role, to take hate incident reports from their communities, because they already have the trust from the community. They would take that and then they would funnel that to the police. I think there's a lot of measures that can be done to support with that process.
Very good. Final question then to Ms. Saheed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to both the witnesses for important testimony and the recommendations which you have given in this important study. Thank you, Ms. Hassan. We have worked closely in Scarborough community. All the work which you are doing in Scarborough to break these walls of hatred is very much appreciated. My question to both of you is that while all members of the Muslim community have been and can be victims of hate crimes, but women are particularly vulnerable. We are more likely to wear traditional clothing such as hijab or our traditional dresses, and therefore we are more visible target. I myself have been a victim of hate when I started wearing hijab. I, being the first woman to wear a hijab and speak from the floor of House of Commons, I think gives a lot of assurance to our young girls and women who would like to see themselves enter politics wearing a hijab. So no woman or girl should be made afraid to wear what she chooses to wear, and what a woman or girl chooses to wear should be her choice and her own. It was very sad to talk to a young university student the other day, where she said to me that she feels scared to stand on a platform of any subway station wearing a hijab. She stands there in a corner with a fear that maybe anyone can push her or something. So can you please briefly share what your experience as a Muslim woman have been, and what we can do today as leaders in our respective communities to assure all women and girls that they are safe wearing a hijab, and to give them the assurance that wearing a hijab would not stop them from achieving their dreams, in whatever fields of life, maybe because many women think that wearing a hijab might be a barrier for getting a good job or entering politics. So I would like to hear your perspective on that issue.
Ms. Hassan.
I'll be very quick so I can give Sadia some time to speak as well. I think what Amira said before she left would send a huge signal to the Muslim community that the federal government is there to support Muslims and hijab-wearing women. Condemning Bill 21, because honestly, that bill has really made Muslim women think they are not they're not part of this country, especially those that live in Quebec. They're not recognized citizens of this country. They're not contributing members of this country. They have been made to feel that way. And the strongest signal that you can send to Muslim girls that may or may not want to wear a hijab or a niqab is that you will not stand idle and you will not stand silent while a province in our own country passes legislation that violates their constitutional rights. So condemning Bill 21 would be a very, very strong signal.
Very good. Final comment, Ms. Mahdi.
I agree completely with what Ms. Hassan had just said. It was very hurtful to see that a province in Canada could actually successfully pass a bill that was so racist and Islamophobic and hurtful to all people who wear religious clothing or symbols. And, you know, definitely if the federal government says that this is unconstitutional and it can't be done, that would be a great step. But it would also prevent people who felt validated in their hateful opinions by the passing of that bill, where they would say that, no, this is, you know, Canada is not going to tolerate it. And going back to MP Zahid, it is very, it warms my heart when I see a fellow hijab wearing woman in your position. And it is very inspiring. And, you know, when I was young, it wasn't something that I actually ever thought possible. We were okay with, you know, the old white men being in charge of the government. And slowly we saw more representation from women, and then slowly women of color, and then now Muslim women. So it is, you know, you guys are really trailblazers, and we wish you well. And we're with you, but definitely when our kids see representation, even something small, like if they see a commercial on TV and there's a woman wearing a hijab, for whatever reason, it gives them such pleasure to see that we are being represented. And that's something that we didn't have, you know, when I was growing up. So it is, you know, a great responsibility on your shoulders, but we are with you, and we are very thankful that you have chosen this, you know, line of work. But wherever these, you know, hateful things creep up, it is now your responsibility to make sure that they are shot back down and they're not allowed to grow and fester.
Very well said. I want to thank all of our witnesses today. Great study. We will continue. There's lots more to talk about. For the committee members, on Tuesday, we'll discuss committee business and the work plan for this important report. At this point, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Seeing lots of nods, then I shall see you on Tuesday. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.